Essentially, we're all involved in design. So then the question is, what is geography? And many of you are geographers, and so you have the many definitions of geography. My favorites are Carl Sauer's, and Sauer called geography both the science of observation as well as reading the face of the earth. And of course, J.B. Jackson wrote and spent a career talking about how to read landscapes. And he essentially saw the landscape as a beautiful book, and it was our task to learn how to read it. So this is another quote. I wish I could attribute it. The first time I saw this quote was at the Charles Darwin Center in the Galapagos Islands, and it was attributed to Charles Darwin. And I thought that the Charles Darwin Center would quote Charles Darwin correctly, but it turns out they didn't, even though it's on a lot of T-shirts that they sell at the Charles Darwin Center. But still, I think it's an interesting quote, and it certainly in the time of climate change and rapid urbanization certainly could apply to us. So we are arguably the most adaptive and resilient species, and actually design and planning are tools of adaptation. So we adapt as a species, I would argue, mostly through design and planning. What I'm going to do is go through a couple quick projects to argue that the way we are viewing urban areas is changing very dramatically. And I want to make that case by showing a few projects. And you will mostly be aware of these projects, I'm sure. This is Millennium Park in Chicago. The High Line, I'll return to the High Line in a moment. The High Line in Lower Manhattan, the transformation that the Friends of the High Line, James Corner, Field Operations, and Renfro Scofidio, thanks. Did with the High Line. This is my favorite part of the High Line, the little amphitheater that overlooks traffic. The major difference between the drawings of the High Line and the actual use of the High Line is there's actually more people using it than were photoshopped in the drawings. A similar project you may be familiar with in Seoul, South Korea. This is a highway that when the Japanese occupied Korea, they built through the center of Seoul. It was hated by the Koreans. A very ambitious mayor who later became president of Korea decided to rip up the highway and to develop this linear park through the heart of Seoul. This is what it looks like today, an amazing transformation. Really more of a fountain than a stream. The water is really recycled from the river. Similar project in Madrid. It's Madrid-Rio project, originally West 8. Did northern northern Madrid. Was a wealthier part of Madrid. There's a highway. This is a highway that split Madrid into a wealthier and poorer area. The project was, these are the images from the competition to essentially tear up the highways in this case again, and to create parkland. This is what it looks like realized. Another image of Madrid-Rio. It's inspired projects. The High Line, the project in Korea, Madrid-Rio have inspired similar efforts around the world. This is from Mexico City. A group of architects have put together this scheme to take this highway that runs through Mexico City and do something very similar to what's been done in Rio, or what's been done in Madrid as well as Korea. And these are some images from that. Back in Brooklyn, this is a firm called D-Land Studio. The Guamas Canal is one of the most polluted places on the planet. Usually it's in those special victims unit programs on TV. They're always pulling someone out of the Guamas Canal. Susanna Drake and her colleagues at D-Land Studio used the metaphor of sponge park to change the image of the Guamas Canal. These are some of their images. And the basic idea is to turn the whole area around the Guamas Canal into a water filtration system to clean the water and clean the canal. And a sign of success anywhere these days is when the Austin-based Whole Foods market moves into the neighborhood, and it's called the Whole Foods effect. And so Whole Foods has moved in next to the Guamas Canal. And these are some more images. One more sort of just to make this case that how we are viewing urban areas is in a very fundamental time of change. This is another James Corner Field Operations project, this one in the Seattle waterfront. And these are their images of the Seattle waterfront and what it could be. Correct because of the rain that occurs in Seattle. So I would argue that there's a new kind of aesthetic that is evolving. It's an ecological aesthetic, and that and when you look at urban areas, the projects I just showed, I think, are ample evidence of a shift in how we're starting to occupy urban spaces. So that aesthetic, I think, is fundamentally linked to geography. How do we represent this ecological aesthetic? Geodesign, what is that? I basically agree with Carl Steiner's definition. He gives several. This is, I think, the verb definition. And I find it somewhat similar to the definition of landscape architecture, but that's probably another discussion. So one of the promises of geodesign is that we can expand the kind of representational tools that are available beyond GIS and beyond overlay mapping. And this is something I've been thinking about since the first geodesign conference and the first geodesign summit. So what other techniques, what other kinds of tools can we use to represent landscapes, and how might they be useful in geodesign? So what I did is I went back to a variety of reports by Ian McHarg from the 1960s and 1970s. He was very well known for overlay mapping, very well known for his use of maps. I thought, what else did McHarg use in those reports from the 60s and 70s, and how might they help us with geodesign today? And here's a list of the main tools that were used by McHarg: overlay maps, transects, diagrams, which Carl Steinitz mentioned in his workshop before this. Steve Irvin made a big point of the importance of diagrams in the initial geodesign summit: bird's eye perspectives, block diagrams, drawing, and photography. Okay, so perspective drawing. Brunelleschi did not invent perspective drawing. However, he popularized perspective drawing. Perspective drawing became, I think, the most important tool for designers from the 15th century till our times. And I would argue, and this is an easy place to make this argument, that overlay mapping has had a similar impact as perspective drawings. Like Brunelleschi, McHarg did not invent overlay mapping, but he did popularize it. And he did argue that there's a way to put together maps to display opportunities and constraints for development, with time being a very important factor. This is a McHarg overlay map from 1972. It's in his plan for the woodlands in Texas. This is another diagram from that same report. And by the way, Carl Steinitz also talked about hydrologic fracking. The man who invented hydrologic fracking was a Texas oil man, as we call him, named George Mitchell, who also was responsible for the Woodlands Newtown that employed McHarg to develop the plan. Now, of course, and there's been all kinds of evidence the last couple of days, overlay mapping through GIS is just advanced incredibly. And these are some suitability mapping from GIS. We go back to McHarg. This is, on the top, an image from 1968. It was done with hand overlays. Essentially, it shows the areas of Staten Island that he found unsuitable for urbanization. So you can see the dark areas. These are the areas that were abandoned or evacuated after Hurricane Sandy. So we've known for some time where places are that are best and not good to settle. McHarg also used maps very effectively. This is a map of the coastline of Toronto. It was drawn actually by Anne Spirn, who's now at MIT, and Narendra Janeja. And what's interesting to me is the maps that were used by McHarg and his colleagues always were accompanied by diagrams and always describe a written description. So there wasn't maps or suitability overlay maps or individual maps by themselves. It was always this other information. Again, if we fast forward, look at maps today. These are the 100-year flood zones and what's predicted by FEMA of areas that will flood in the future. Some fun things. This is also Manhattan. The red, these are from Flickr images. The red lines are Flickr images that have been posted by tourists, and the blue lines are Flickr images that are posted by New York residents. So same thing in San Francisco Bay Area. So you can see where, through social media, who is taking what kinds of images. McHarg was also very fond of transects. This is from his book Design with Nature of the New Jersey shore. This is an interesting reinterpretation of that transect done by Andres Dewani and Liz Platter-Zyberg. This cross-section is from the plan for Amelia Island led by his partner Bill Roberts. And if we fast forward, we can look at many examples of designers using transects today. This particular one was done by Chris Reed, who teaches now at Harvard and has a firm called Stoss Landscape Urbanism. Here's another transect, which it's from London, or from England, I'm sorry, and fascinating sort of way of looking at buildings. And then the use of diagrams. This again is from the Woodlands Report. We would now call this low impact development, but from the 1970s, this is McHarg's illustration trying to convince George Mitchell to protect the native woodlands, or the native drainage areas in the woodlands. These are some diagrams McHarg used at the Amelia Island to show sun orientation. This is 1974, 1975. Another one showing sun orientations in winter. And then if we look at diagrams as they're being used today, this is a diagram for, again, a James Corner field operations project for fresh kills in Staten Island, showing diagrammatically the process that that plan should take. This is one that was done by Nina Marie Lister, who is from Canada, with Chris Reed, a diagram showing fish habitat and where those fish would occupy. They called it a sex park for fish. So they would create this area, and it would encourage the fish to breed accordingly. McHarg also used bird's eye perspectives. This is a bird's eye perspective of the Potomac Valley. Another, again, from Design with Nature. And those bird's eye perspectives were accompanied by maps and written descriptions and drawings. And from today, these are drawings. Harry Dobson with Randall Arndt and Bob Yarrow have used these kind of bird's eye perspectives very effectively. This is shows a Connecticut River valley landscape. This is what it will look like with traditional development, and this is what it looks like with smart development. Another tool McHarg used a lot was block diagrams. This is sort of an underutilized term, I think, today. Block diagrams come from the geologic sciences, and these are some examples from the geologic sciences. These two are examples from studios at the University of Pennsylvania that McHarg taught. When I took this studio, I had one classmate who spent his whole semester doing a block diagram. It was, it took Da Vinci or Michelangelo less time to do the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So block diagrams, I think, are a very ripe tool for geodesign. Here are some, of course, today digital elevation models is one term that we use to describe part of what a block diagram is. And then architects, landscape architects, have been very effective at sort of pulling together parts of buildings and landscapes to display them in this way. A conceptual model block diagram here showing three-dimensionally the ocean and the surface and so on. McHarg also used drawings very effectively. This drawing is from a park that was done in Tehran. It was sort of his last major project with the firm, which kicked him out after this project, another story. These drawings were done by a man named Colin Franklin, who went on to found a firm called Andropogon. These are all drawings from that park. Another of sort of McHarg's last projects with what was then Wallace McHarg, Roberts and Todd, became Wallace, Roberts and Todd. This is the new capital for Abuja, or Nigeria, called Abuja, with this major hill being used as the main focal point for the new town. And the hill is named Aso Hill. And this is a drawing my daughter did. She works for D-Land Studio. They are doing a zoo for Nigeria, and you can see she's used a hill too. I'm not sure how she's keeping that lion away from the zebra. I think there's a ha-ha in there somewhere. Another drawing, this is a Chris Reed drawing from a competition in Toronto. This is a wonderful drawing by Michael Van Valkenburg for a competition in Austin called the Waller Creek competition, which really was conceived by my colleague Alan Shearer, who's here. The drawing is done differently, and it's being done by computer, and it's very evocative and very beautiful. McHarg used photography extensively in his reports. This is from a report that was done in Vermont that led to the enactment of the State Planning Act in Vermont, wonderful use of black and white imagery, also used aerial photography. From today, we have wonderful work by Ann Spurn, who is a big advocate of the use of photography. Work like this by Mark Klett, wonderful geologist turned photographer from Arizona. This image, which shows an overlay of a current French town and what it looked like in 1944 or 45, and just the inverse here, a gym in Maryland showing what it was like in its heyday with what it is like today. Aerial photography has moved so I can take my iPhone and take a picture out my window if I like going over a place in Indiana, to wonderful kinds of images. Something McHarg didn't use, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to go fast. It was the use of video, and there's been a couple good examples today. These two examples I'm going to show, and I'll do them quickly, are from a firm called the Brooklyn Digital Foundry. The Brooklyn Digital Foundry, and they did this animation for the High Line. This was done after the design was done, and basically they used it to raise money for the High Line. Very, very successful. When this was first shown Several $million were raised that evening, but this is a tool that several people have alluded to. They showed what the High Line was like historically, how in a moment it'll be abandoned. I wish I had that fast forward that I discovered the fellow used earlier today, Elliot used earlier today. But in a matter, interest of time, what I'm going to do is go on. This is another Brooklyn Digital Foundry project, really different. This is a building in Soho. And the idea of this building is they designed a building, and then they would abandon the building for a year. And they would just let the building go in Lower Manhattan, or in Soho, and it would be taken over by graffiti. And then after a year, it would be reoccupied in what that building would look like. So this is I think a very imaginative use of digital photography. Okay, so lots of tools. How then might we use those tools to help advance an ecological aesthetic? I think these are sort of research areas that I think would be interesting to explore. One is the area of ecosystem services. I think we need to move in response to climate change away from sustainable development towards regenerative design, a term that John Lyle developed in the 1990s. And I think we have to learn how to better design for extreme weather events. We've been using the ecosystem services concept in the Sustainable Sites Initiative. Many of you probably know about the Sustainable Sites Initiative. It's essentially LEED for outdoors. We've been developing it for the last 7 years. We've developed a rating system. These are some examples of the early pilot projects. And we're wrapping up our agreement with the U.S. Green Building Council, the Green Building Certification Institute. So about a year from now, one will be able to become like a LEED certified professional, a site certified professional as well. Extreme weather events, hurricanes and typhoons, the impact, which we're all aware of. We have Japan here. We have Hurricane Katrina. We have floods in Rio, tornadoes in the Midwest, wildfires in Texas, wildfires in Australia. So, a sort of fundamental question for us as people, if we know some places are dangerous to settle, why do we continue to build there? A few years ago, there was an exhibit at MoMA called Rising Currents. And there were 4 firms that were submitted to give sort of their views of how New York could adjust to climate change. One of them was this one. It was done by the architects ARO and the landscape architects who I've mentioned before, D-Land Studio. And so they imagined this new zone in Lower Manhattan. This is what it looked like in plan diagram. And then they worked out sort of the plumbing for Lower Manhattan, how to absorb this rise. Another of these was done by Kate Orff and her firm Scape. And she envisioned a new oyster farming industry off the coast of what's now Brooklyn, off the coast of Red Hook, and again, the Guamas Canal. And these are some of her and her colleagues' images of that. And one of the striking images that was used in the MoMA exhibit was this one, which showed New York underwater, which seemed to be an abstract idea a few years ago until, of course, Hurricane Sandy happened. And this was the reality of, these are not photoshopped images, these are the real thing now, and the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, which brings us back to Brooklyn, back to Bushwick. And I just wanted to end with a couple sort of what's going on in Brooklyn and what's the art scene, what's what's happening with tactical urbanism, with social media. It's become, as I mentioned at the beginning, a very lively, very creative place, and one which I think should inspire us. So Bushwick, you're beautiful, and thank you very much.